Craigslist. It's the digital town square, a place for the mundane, a posting for a used couch, an ad for a carpet installer, or maybe a cheap phone for sale. We browse these listings assuming the person on the other end is just like us, but that assumption is a gamble. Because those ads, while they are initiations of transactions, they're also initiations with a conversation with a stranger. What happens when the person you let into your home is not who they claim to be? When a simple errand to a bad neighborhood descends into a place you were never meant to see? And what dark networks operate just beneath the surface of those anonymous postings, searching for something other than a used sofa? Today we have 4 true disturbing stories from the archives of Craigslist.org. So please, enjoy. So, this was something that happened back when I had my first house. I had been living there for a few years at this point, and I was itching to do some renovations. I was wanting to replace the carpet in the bedrooms, and tear up the carpet in the living room, and have hardwood in there and in the kitchen. I also wanted to paint the walls to add some much-needed color and eventually replace the kitchen cabinets. I knew that was going to take some time and money, so I started with the paint. I had a few people take turns coming over to help out. I was painting the 2 bedrooms and the living room, which didn't take too long, and after that was done, I focused on the flooring, deciding I would do the cabinets last after I got some quotes on them. As for the flooring, I found a good deal on the carpet that I wanted, but everywhere I looked for installers, their prices were way out of my range, or they just weren't available to do it when I was wanting to get it done. So I decided I would try to find an independent installer, maybe someone running their own smaller and local business. And, as such, I started my search on Craigslist. After looking at a couple of advertisements, I finally narrowed it down to 2 different guys and messaged them for quotes. One of them said they were out of town and wouldn't be back for a few weeks, and the other guy said that he was available, and his price was about what I was expecting to pay. He was very professional and laid out what to expect and how long it would take, and I accepted. I sent him pictures of the rooms and the dimensions, and we locked in a price. He was going to be coming out the following week with another one of his guys and doing the installation. I had everything moved out into my garage in a storage cube, wherever I could get it out of the rooms, so they didn't have to worry about it. Then, promptly at 11 a.m., there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, I was surprised to see just one guy, Rick, as he said that someone else would be with him, but otherwise I paid it no attention. I asked if he was Rick, he confirmed, and I let him in. I did what I normally do when I had some kind of maintenance work being done and started explaining what I was wanting. I showed him the carpet that I'd had delivered and watched as he looked over the rooms with an almost confused look. Now, I can be a pretty awkward guy myself, so I just kept talking as he looked around and even grumbled a few things. Then, he let out a big sigh, smiled at me, and said that he was ready to get to work. I told him I would be out back trying to clean up my yard. I was outside for a good hour or so when I took a phone call from my dad. We continued talking, and I went back inside to write something down. I looked down the hall and could see the pile of old carpet and heard familiar sounds of thuds and tearing. Afterwards, I went back outside to finish my work. It had been another hour and I was getting hungry and thought I would be nice and offered to get food for both of us. I went back in and noticed that the old carpet had been completely removed from both rooms, and Rick was standing in one room staring at the roll of new carpet. It was standing up, still rolled, and it was like he was examining it. I asked him if everything was good, and he just gave me a slow, uh-huh. A little strange, but I thought maybe he was just thinking over the best way to start. I thought that it was weird that it had been 2 hours, and all he had done was tear out some of the old carpet. But I also wasn't a carpet installer, so I didn't know how long each step was going to take. Even though, in the estimate, he gave me a time frame on how long it would take to tear out and replace the carpet in both rooms, as well as the flooring in the living room and the kitchen. I decided to let it go, and I asked him if he wanted pizza and that I was going to order some. Again, he just kept staring at the carpet and nodded, slowly saying, "Sounds good, brother." I asked him if he wanted anything specific, and he shook his head. Maybe he just wasn't a social person, so I backed out of the room and placed my order from my laptop. I shoved it in my backpack, put it back in the closet, and then went back outside. The pizza only took about 40 minutes, as it normally did when I ordered from that place. And I once again was outside the entire time. I had moved to the front yard and was de-weeding, thinking it would be easier when the pizza did arrive. They showed up, I paid and tipped and took the boxes from the man and then went back in through my front door. I put the boxes on the counter and started making my way down the hall to let Rick know the pizza was here, when I noticed he wasn't in either room, and that roll of carpet hadn't been touched. I looked back and noticed the bathroom door was closed and that the light was on. He was clearly in the bathroom, which was fine, but it had been about 40 to 50 minutes since I last saw him, and he hadn't even unrolled the carpet. What was going on? I just went back to the kitchen not wanting to be awkward and grabbed a slice. I again kept in mind that we had a locked-in price and estimate on time, so it's not like I was going to give him more if it took longer. Well, unless something went wrong, but he hadn't done anything for almost an hour. Regardless, being mean does not come naturally for me, so I shouted from the kitchen that the pizza was here and sat on my counter as I ate and scrolled through my phone. It was probably another 15 minutes and the guy was still in the bathroom. Now I was growing a little concerned, or I guess maybe curious. I shouted down the hallway, asking if he was alright, and there was no response. I started a text to my dad, preparing to tell him and ask him about all this. He had his own lawn care business, so I wanted to mention my experience with Rick. But then the bathroom door opened, and I noticed that I didn't even hear the toilet flush. He walked into the kitchen and stared at the pizza. That was when I really noticed that something was wrong. He was very sweaty. His forehead was completely wet and his hairline was dark. His eyes were wide open and red, and worst of all, there was a small bit of blood running down his arm from the inside of his elbow. I just remember thinking at that moment, did this guy do what I think he just did in my bathroom? I stood there silently watching him when he looked at me and asked if I was paying him in cash or check. I told him I was going to pay by check as we agreed. He sighed and said that he wanted to be paid in cash instead. Odd request, but I told him that was fine, but I would have to go to the bank to get it because I didn't have that kind of cash on me. He asked me why not, and I explained that I had no reason to have that kind of cash on me, and reminded him that we had agreed on a check. He didn't acknowledge that, but then asked if we were going to go get the cash then. Confused, I told him no because I wasn't going to pay him until he was finished. Again, as we had agreed. I asked if he wanted half up front and the rest when he finished, but he said no, since he would have it done the same day that I could just pay when he was done. I had the messages to prove it. That is when he started to become agitated. He said that he would never agree to that and demanded his payment now, adding another $1,000 to it. I stopped him and reminded him of the price we had agreed on, and again, he was angry. He yelled at me that I was messing with him and trying to rip him off. I told him that we had this in writing, and I even offered to pull up the messages to prove it, when he pulled out a carpet knife from his pocket and lunged at me. I managed to move to the side, missing the knife, but he elbowed me in the process. Everything happened so fast in that moment. There was a good scuffle between us. I bit him on the arm, which got him to loosen his grip on me, and I ran through the kitchen door, which led to my backyard. I only had my phone on me, that was thankfully still in my pocket, but I didn't even have my car keys. I ran down the street, wanting to be out of view of him in case he ran after me, and I called the police from the corner and told them what was happening. I waited there until I heard the sirens and then ran back down to my house. I warned the police that I thought he was high and that he had a knife on him. 2 of them walked in the front door and 1 went to the back. I stayed by the front door per their directions. I heard them shouting, "Put the knife down!" and then a lot of thuds. And then they led the guy out in cuffs. He had a white substance on his face and head, as well as blood on his face and arm. Once they had the guy in their car, I went inside with them and learned what that white substance was that was all over him. And no, it wasn't what you're thinking it was. Rick had completely destroyed my kitchen wall that the door was on. The cops said that when they walked in, he was smashing his head against the wall and was still holding the knife, scraping at the wall with it. There were large gouges and scratches where he was carving at it with that knife, as well as dents and holes where he put his head and maybe his fist through it. The whole thing was just so bizarre to me because the door wasn't even locked. He could have just opened it like I did and left, but it was like he was trying to dig his way out. Ultimately, he was charged with property damage, assault, and possession. He still had a baggie on him, but he graciously left his needle in my bathroom. He didn't even finish the carpet, nor did I pay him, obviously. I physically made it out okay, but then I had to find someone else to finish the flooring, and now repair the kitchen wall. And no, I did not go through Craigslist for any of that. I learned my lesson. Back when I was first starting out on my own, I relied heavily on Craigslist. When my boyfriend and I got our first place together, we were always on there to buy stuff for our home, selling stuff we no longer wanted, or even just to make some quick money. We even job searched on the site plenty of times. Back then, it was the place to find things you needed. The worst thing I ever came across was someone trying to short me on something they were buying, but that's why I always made sure my boyfriend or brother were with me. Can't be too careful. But there was one experience that we both witnessed that, in the moment, was pretty terrifying. And thinking back on it, it could have gone incredibly wrong. At the time of this story, I was broke as hell. I was still a full-time college student and working part-time at a big-name retail store. We were doing okay for the time being, but there's always something that has to pop up, right? So my phone died. It wouldn't hold a charge no matter what I tried. I certainly couldn't afford to have it looked at and fixed because I knew it would be expensive. Not to mention there weren't a lot of shops like that around us like there are now. So we turned to looking on Craigslist for a cheap used phone. I just needed it to hold a charge and be able to make and receive calls and texts. After scrolling around, we saw a posting for an iPhone 4, I believe for $100. At the time, this phone was out of date, but it was hardly a step down compared to what I already had. And for that price, I got pretty excited. My boyfriend Clay did warn me not to get my hopes up, thinking there had to be something wrong with it, so he messaged the person about it. They confirmed it wasn't stolen, the screen wasn't broken, etc. They just said they didn't like smartphones. We assumed that maybe it was an older person or someone not good with technology, and they wanted to downgrade too. Their loss was my gain, and I jumped on it. We scheduled a pickup time the next day, and we would meet at their house. So we plugged the address into our GPS and headed out. As bad as this is going to sound, the neighborhood got progressively worse as we drove. We lived in a pretty rundown apartment complex, so I get it, but we went from nice-looking houses near the city, then your normal suburban houses, to ones that seemed to be forgotten by time, and then the neighborhoods that just looked abandoned. The problem with that last part is that most of the houses looked like that, including our destination. The grass was overgrown, the gate was just leaning against the fence, there was what looked like a board of some kind covering one of the windows. There was no way someone was living there. I called the number that we were given from the messages and mentioned that I thought we had the address wrong, but she confirmed we had it correct, and asked us to walk around to the side door. I know, it may have seemed suspicious, but she sounded like a sweet older lady with the thickest southern drawl that I've ever heard. Clay and I made eye contact and nodded, a way for us to both agree to proceed with caution. Walking up to the door, we could tell just how bad the condition of the house was. There was plastic over another window. The porch railing was literally hanging on by a single post, and there was a hole through the bottom of it. We didn't even have to knock on the door. The woman opened it to us and invited us in. Even with the area and how bad the house looked on the outside, she just looked like your normal old lady. She reminded me of my own grandma, in a long dress with a thin robe over it, and her hair pulled back into a bun. She had the most polite smile as she greeted us. She had us step inside through what looked like a small mudroom, past the kitchen, and into the living room, and that's when the panic started to set in. First, the inside of the house past that little mudroom was just as bad, if not worse, than the outside. There was this musty smell mixed with something chemical and sweet. The walls were streaked with brown running down the walls. There were piles of trash, newspaper, and clothes everywhere. But the house wasn't even the worst part. It was the people in the kitchen that we walked by. There were about 6 people sitting around the dining table, and they weren't there eating or hanging out. They were very clearly high, or well on their way to being as such. There were 2 that were slumped over completely unconscious. 2 guys were hunched over the table with aluminum foil and lighters underneath. One lady had something wrapped around her upper arm, with the guy next to her holding a needle in his mouth. Not a single one of them looked up at us. It was like we weren't even there. I began to panic a bit. I had never been around something like that, and I was worried they might get aggressive with the stranger being there and witnessing it. But I was so conflicted by the whole situation. Grandma here didn't even bat an eye to it, and led us straight into the living room where she pulled the phone out of a basket on a bookshelf. I tried to just focus on the phone as she handed it to me. She told me I could turn it on and check it over if I wanted to, so I powered it on. And Clay was checking it out to make sure it wasn't iCloud locked, and it wasn't, thankfully. Clearly, in the situation we were in, we weren't going to question the phone, but she had apparently gone through this before because she explained where it had come from. She said a friend of hers gave her the phone to settle a debt that he owed. Then she said that she was going to keep it and try to use it herself, but she couldn't figure it out, explaining that she still preferred the old flip phones in their simplicity. Then, and this is the part that really freaked me out, she asked if I knew how to wipe it so it couldn't be traced, explaining that she was no longer on good terms with said friend, and that it would be better to just factory reset it. Explaining it like this was a completely normal thing to mention. I was stunned by everything around me and found it hard to speak. Clay jumped in and said that it would be no problem and confirmed the price with her. As he began to pull out his wallet, I heard someone cough, which made me look over to the kitchen again. The woman noticed this and slightly chuckled. She pointed to the kitchen and asked if we wanted to stay for some, quote unquote, saying that she would only charge us $20 for both of us since we were so polite. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only did she acknowledge that what I saw was real, but she offered some to us. Clay again was smooth the entire time. He casually said no thanks, gave her the money, and thanked her for the phone. She smiled and shook our hands and then led us back to the door. We got back into the car and I immediately asked, "Was that what I think I saw? And did she just really offer some to us?" Unfortunately, he confirmed that I was not hallucinating in that house. So then my fears grew more. Was the story about the phone true? It was just given to pay off a debt? Looking through it, we really couldn't identify the owner. It looked like someone had deleted all the photos on it and was manually installing apps, but it was still clearly somebody's phone. There were contacts, but all calls had been deleted as well as messages. We didn't know how to handle this. We bought the phone and had proof of that, but what if the phone was stolen? And what about the original owner? Were they aware of the phone? Was what she said true? Would that friend come looking for us? Clay said that we should try to reset it and see if we can use it, knowing that we bought it fairly, but I was too afraid of it coming back to bite us. But then, if I reported it, what are the chances they go to that house, find those people, and then that woman and her friends come looking for us? It felt like a damned if we do and damned if we don't situation. After a lot of talking, we decided to call the non-emergency line and ask how to proceed. They suggested that we go to a police station and explain the same things, so we did. The cop took down some of the phone info, but explained to us that, typically in those situations, unless the owner reports the phone stolen, nothing really happens. He said that we did the right thing with reporting it though, which will look better for us if anything does happen, and then told us to enjoy our purchase. It felt weird, like wrong, but I wasn't a cop, so I trusted that what he told us was the truth. We went home, reset the phone, and I was able to successfully use it. We never got a call from any authorities, never saw any reports or news stories about a home being raided, someone ending up dead, or reporting the stolen phone, so I guess we were in the clear. And maybe those two situations, what I saw in the house and the phone, were completely separate. But considering what I was dealing with, my mind turned to a worst-case scenario. I used the phone for a few years until I could afford a new one, but after that experience, I didn't buy electronics on Craigslist ever again. Send your scary stories to astheravendreams.com or astheravendreams@gmail.com to be featured on the podcast. Every so often, a case will come along where the details and bloody crime scenes, while disturbing, are slightly eclipsed by the true weight and horror lying just below the surface. The true nature of someone that truly dwells in the darkest parts of their own mind. Sometimes the look inside the mind of a killer is almost as terrifying as the crimes they committed. It's also a testament that crimes generally don't happen in a vacuum. In this specific case, it's even more unnerving because the person in question was an NYPD officer. His name was Gilberto Valle, and while no evidence ever came to light that proved he acted on his proclivities, let's say, the behavior that ended up getting him arrested was so disturbing that the prosecutor leaned very heavily on the angle of thought crime. And while we are certainly not huge fans of the notion of punishing someone for thought crime, in this instance, I feel it was incredibly justified. So, what happened exactly? Well, in 2012, Valle's wife discovered some pretty disturbing things on her husband's computer. It seemed like Valet had been visiting various adult fetish sites. Okay, in and of itself, may be a bit weird and even disturbing, but nothing on the surface that seems too outlandish or even criminal yet. But the problem truly was just where his interests and fantasies lie. You see, Gilberto Valet wasn't just a kinky freak. He had some very, very disturbing fetishes. And believe me when I say that they were some of the darkest of the dark. Officer Valet's dark desires involved the abduction, torture, and cannibalization of women. And once his wife informed the authorities of what she found, and the FBI began to scour his computer for any kind of evidence, what they found only made things infinitely worse, especially for his wife, for reasons that are about to become clear. The FBI found what were essentially blueprints for committing these crimes in real life. They found a list of women's names. Most of these names were women that Valet knew, and some of them were friends of his wife. This list also included many personal details about the women, followed by a step-by-step recipe for each individual. There were many chats that read very much like some kind of elaborate roleplay script. This is one of the facts that made so much about the case a muddled mess, with more questions than anyone had answers for at that moment. The prosecution went hard on the thought crime angle, arguing that the blueprints showed intent and even preparation to commit a crime, while the defense tried to play the "it's just a fantasy" card, that lurid chats and grotesque documents were merely part of a fantasy roleplay. And then in 2013, when he was convicted of conspiracy to kidnap, there was even further debate sparked by the case. Was he really a dangerous criminal in the making? Or was he just a twisted pervert that was caught up in his own dark fantasies and kinks? In 2014, things would further get flipped on their heads, when a judge overturned the ruling saying that there was no evidence that Valet ever planned on following through with any of his fantasies. They found no evidence to suggest that he had been stalking any potential victims. No supplies had been bought, and no kidnapping attempts were made. This horrified many people. This notion that someone could harbor these kinds of thoughts about friends and people close to them, and even fantasize about murdering and eating them in a specific way, and still go free. The 2014 ruling was an absolute watershed moment for the American justice system and the country as a whole. It blew wide open the question about fantasy crime, and had many people concerned about just where the line between fantasy and intent was, because now that all-important line was so blurred. Some people saw this as a necessary protection of freedom of speech. This was a case that ended up having very little to do with cannibalism, and it became one of those cases that brought more debate about the legal system, the reach of law enforcement. It also raised questions such as, when does dark fantasy become a crime? And at what point does talking about these fantasies shift into conspiracy? These are very hard questions, of course. Not ones that I have any kind of compelling answer for. The general mentality of the country was already in disarray from the aftermath of some very significant events, such as 9/11 or the Arab Spring. During this time, the issues of surveillance and online radicalization were also forefront. But at the end of the day, what it does is make us all ask questions about the things we see posted on the internet. Is it just a dark act of escapism? Or is it really a how-to manual for someone to commit a truly terrifying crime? It was definitely a relevant debate, because Valet did actually use those forums on Craigslist to network with other people, with the same kinds of proclivities. Of course, this would bring up a whole different paranoid kind of reaction from the public, because now they were confronted by the fact that places like Craigslist and other online communities may actually be places where very real predators come, trying to live out their dark fantasies at the expense of unsuspecting people they connect with through the internet. It's something else that should definitely be a factor when you consider the details of this case. Valet was a seemingly ordinary man, a police officer with a wife and a young child. This was a man that would cook dinner for his wife, go on a family outing, and then once he made it back home, he would abandon that reality and dive into the cesspool of depravity with his role plays about torturing and eating women. That is an absolutely disturbing double life to ever think about someone living. This also, of course, brings up the questions about cyber anonymity, which is a very interesting iceberg in and of itself. But with that kind of buffer between the person writing these things and the person they're writing to, it begs the question if, by keeping the internet anonymous as it has been, are we really just enabling predators to go about their dark deeds? Perhaps this is something we should look into and have a conversation about. Which is funny in a dark kind of way, because that is in fact still a debate that is raging wildly today, 11 years after the overturned conviction. So, thought crime and dark fantasies are subjects that definitely deserve to have some productive conversations about. I think that these kind of things matter, and when it's a matter of public safety, I feel it should be handled with a certain amount of gravitas, and in the most respectful way possible. I really am not sure what other kind of closing thoughts to include here without kicking hornet nests, so I'm going to kick it back over to Raven, and as always, thanks for listening. Back in 2012, I was moving across the country for my job. I had gotten a promotion and was incredibly excited to make the move. However, it was just going to be me doing the move, so while my work was going to reimburse me for the move itself, there were several things I didn't want to move or pay someone to do, which included most of my larger items. The plan was to keep my mattress, my tall dresser since I got it from my grandma, and anything I could take apart like my 2 bookshelves. The rest of the larger items, like the bed frame, other shelves that I couldn't break down, the couch and chair, would have to go. My brother took my recliner. He'd had his eyes on it for a while. The other items I listed on Craigslist, thinking I could probably get some cash out of them. The couch became the reason that I now have this memory. It was a pretty normal-looking gray couch that I got on clearance from IKEA. It wasn't too pricey, and I'd had it for about 3 years, so it was definitely far from new, but was also still in good condition. I was asking for $200. I posted it with several pictures and explained that I just no longer needed it since I was moving. No pets, no smoking. I had used Craigslist to sell a car 2 years prior and didn't have any issues, so I put my phone number on the ad too, not thinking much about it. I posted it on a Saturday, and within a few hours, I got a text from a new number asking if the couch was still available. I replied, saying that it was, and they asked to set up a time to see it that evening. I was impressed, thinking I was going to get this thing sold the same day. Great. They said they would be there around 5 p.m., so I gave my address and went about my day. I even vacuumed the couch and used my room freshener to make it a bit more presentable. It was a little before 5, like maybe 4:50 or so, when they texted me saying they were running a bit late but were still interested. They even asked me not to sell it yet, saying they would throw in an extra $50 if I held it. I was confused like this. I had just posted the couch earlier that day. I only had one other person ask about it, and I messaged them explaining that someone else was checking on it first, and they didn't respond. So, as far as I was concerned, it was hers. I didn't think it was necessary to throw extra money at me. So, it was 5:02. I kid you not, 2 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I opened the door to see a middle-aged woman standing there in one of those old-looking 2-piece business sets. The peplum-style ones with shoulder pads and a pencil skirt. The design looked like it should have been on a curtain. She had dark brown hair pulled back in a bun with some kind of covering over it, like a bonnet style. When I opened the door, she was clutching her handbag tightly and smiling until her eyes met mine, and her smile seemed to drop some. She looked surprised to see me. It was strange, but I greeted her and confirmed that she was here about the couch, and she nodded. I opened the door wider and motioned for her to come in. I began explaining that I was moving across the country, so there was nothing wrong with the couch. I just couldn't take it with me. As I spoke, I watched her circle the couch, eyeing it. She went and stood at specific angles of the couch, and then she pulled out her phone and stared intently at it, and then at the couch. Almost like she was comparing whatever was on her phone with the couch. A little weird, but maybe she was looking for something specific. So I started talking about when I got it, and mentioned that I might still actually have the brand name in my email or something if she was looking for it, and she shook her head. She said that she just wanted to make sure it fit. Okay, so maybe she meant fit it with her own room, size-wise, or maybe the color. Maybe she was big on decor and matching, so I just stood silently watching her look at the couch. Then, she finally went and sat on the very edge of the couch, and looked over to the other side, putting her hand on it. She asked me if I could sit next to her. A little odd, but harmless, so I obliged. I sat on the other end of the couch, and because she didn't say anything, I again started talking and joked that I was able to fit 4 of my friends on the couch while we watched movies. To say that it was pretty sturdy. She smiled at me, and then she said that she just had a few questions. Okay, no problem, I thought. I was expecting her to ask about the couch, like the condition it was in or something, but instead she asked me what all I've done on it. I just laughed awkwardly and asked what she meant. She just repeated the question, no explanation. So I just said something about normal couch stuff. Sometimes I read there, watched TV, took a few naps. She asked if I ever ate on it. I told her occasionally, but it was always simple handheld stuff. It's not like I ate on the couch with the bowl of spaghetti. But I told her that nothing had ever been spilled on it, if that was her concern. She just nodded her head, but then she asked me what I usually ate. Clearly that had nothing to do with the couch, so I didn't answer at first. Then she asked me to answer, saying that it would help her with her decision. I didn't see how it did, but I gave her an answer. Then she asked if I had ever cried on it. Again, very weird question, but I was ready to just get this over with, so I went with it. And then she asked if I ever had an argument with someone else sitting there, if I ever had a boyfriend that joined me on the couch, if we ever did anything on it together. And that was the last straw for me. This was sounding less like questions about the couch and more questions about me, framed like it was for the couch. So I told her as much. I told her that I had other people lined up if she didn't want it, and got up to walk back to the door. She asked me to wait and apologized for being weird. That's when this bombshell dropped. She said, "My daughter used to have the same couch. I just miss her so much." And I could hear the shake in her voice like she was about to cry. I felt awful. Clearly, this couch reminded her of her daughter. The questions were very weird, but maybe she was trying to connect it more with her daughter, even if a couch is an odd choice. Grief is expressed in different ways. I said that I was sorry for her loss, and she looked up at me almost confused. I told her that she could have the couch for $100 if she had a way to haul it. She smiled at me and said that wouldn't be necessary and agreed to pay the $200 still. I agreed, and she started opening her wallet. She was counting out bills, and what I thought were 20s at first were actually hundreds. And she counted out 5. She held them out and said that she didn't have a way to get it that night, but that she would give me $500 if I held it for her and she would come back the next day. I wasn't leaving yet, and it's not like I was in a rush, so I didn't mind holding on to it for her for a week, if she needed the time. She thanked me and started walking toward the door. She then started counting out more bills and said that she had another favor to ask. Curious as to what else she could possibly ask me for, I remained silent, waiting for a response. She tried to hand me a stack of cash, and she asked me if I would pretend to be her daughter. I just stared at her confused. I know people grieve differently, but I thought this was a bit out there and definitely not something I was comfortable with. There was some pleading from her, saying that she just wanted me to go to her place occasionally and stay in her daughter's room and have dinner with her, and I said absolutely not. Not only was it creepy, but also I was kind of moving. Then she threw more money at me, asking me to just take pictures with her. Again, I declined and told her this was not okay, and was probably not a healthy way of dealing with her death. She put her arm down and looked at me confused and said, "What? She's not dead. I refuse to talk to her anymore." Wait a minute. This whole time, she was going on as if her daughter was dead. I even said sorry for your loss, and she didn't correct me. So what the hell was going on? Her whole demeanor changed as she explained her whole relationship with her daughter. She explained how they used to be close when she was a kid, but as she got older, she became very rebellious and acted out a lot, wore unsavory clothes, and, exactly as she put it, worst of all, stopped going to church. She said they stopped seeing eye to eye and that she even tried to have her exorcised. So she said that she sent her to live with her father. I was starting to tell why her daughter wanted nothing to do with her. After listening to her list all the things wrong with what sounded like a normal teenage girl, I told her once again that this was not going to work out, and it was best that she just leave. The good thing is, I knew how to keep a stern voice, and she was in my home anyways. She walked out, begging me once more for pictures, and I shut the door on her, locking it. I stood by it looking through the peephole, and she was unmoving. She just stood in front of my door staring at it. I remember thinking for a moment how creepy this was becoming, and wondering if she would be crazy enough to try anything. I walked away to do something, but it had only taken me a few seconds, and I went back to the door to check on her, and she was still there. I yelled at my door, telling her that she needed to leave or that I was going to call the cops, and finally she walked away. I figured that was just my luck, and hopefully the next person that asks about the couch would be normal. But I also told myself to have someone over so I wasn't alone. I actually sold the couch the following week. A middle-aged guy and his son came to pick it up, and they were very polite, and they were in and out. But that entire week before, she was texting me daily, raising the price every time or changing up her offer. $5,000 to just stay one night at her place. $5,000 to go have dinner with her and act like her daughter. $10,000 to take the couch with me and just send her pictures of me on the couch. It was insane. I was just ignoring them, but after the couch sold, I responded saying that it was over and to leave me alone. She sent this long text that was broken into two, that looked like it was this long prayer damning me to hell, so I blocked her number. I was hoping that she would get the hint if I didn't respond, but clearly that wasn't going to work. But then, neither did responding. I moved, as planned, with very little stuff, and I never heard from her again, thankfully. I used Craigslist plenty of times after that, especially after moving to get some new-to-me furniture, but I didn't use my real cell phone number again. Because after that, I definitely learned my lesson. So That My Friends was a collection of scary Craigslist stories. These ones are always interesting to me, fun to do, entertaining at the bare minimum, of course, and creepy at the best, which is pretty much always. Um, Craigslist is a very interesting place, a place I haven't really done business on, so I don't have any personal experiences, but I can tell you right now, I have heard a lot of stories and read quite a few of them, and I know that place can get creepy, so maybe it's not as bad as it is, or sorry, let me phrase that. Maybe it's not as bad nowadays as it once was, but I know that there are stories, obviously. I've read them. They're creepy, scary, strange stuff. Yeah. Hopefully you enjoyed this collection of Craigslist stories. If you did, please do hit that like button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, please consider subscribing, as that helps tremendously. You can also leave me a comment down below with your thoughts. If you've ever had any experiences with Craigslist or anything like that, let me know. If you have a story, send it in to astheravendreams.com. That's an amazing thing to do because it helps me continue doing, videos. You can also check out my social media platforms, all the places where you can find my podcast, and a few other things over on that website. That's again, astheravendreams.com. Check it out if you feel, inclined to. You can also join Patreon or memberships to get early access to content like this. Both get you the same thing, but you get more stuff depending on which one you sign up for. It really depends which one you do. I'm currently looking at Craigslist now, and I can get an SX lap steel guitar with legs and custom gig bag for $450 in my area. It's a lap guitar. Lap guitars are weird. Not relevant. Anyways, hopefully you enjoyed them. Hopefully you have a great day. Hope I see you again here very soon. But until then, remember that you are loved, you are valid, you are important, and you're the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Until next time, my friends, much love, and of course, sleep well.